Welcome to Food Friends, a podcast inspiring home cooks to try new dishes in the kitchen by sharing trusted recipes, tips, and friendship. Hi, I'm Sonia.
And I'm Carrie. We met in Los Angeles over 15 years ago as personal chefs and haven't stopped talking about food since. We're so glad you're here.
Hi, Carrie.
Hi, Sonia.
Carrie, today we're talking about burger night, how to make burgers at home, from beef to non-beef burgers to even vegetarian and vegan options. I feel like this is such a fun way to entertain or even just kind of spice up your midweek meal.
I completely agree. And I was really excited when you proposed this topic. But then it also made me realize I don't usually make a lot of burgers at home now. I used to do it a little bit more when I was a personal chef. I would love to get into it. And I think we have to start with the classic, right? A beef burger.
Yeah, like you, I feel like there's always such great burgers out in the world that sometimes it's not the first thing you think of for home cooking. But I do think in the summer, whether it's on a grill or just eating outdoors, having burgers and then all those fresh elements, it makes it kind of a low lift because you don't have to cook that much. Burgers cook really quick. And I do think there's some tips that both you and I learned when we were personal chefs, because I know we both had clients who would ask for burgers. In fact, I remember we talked about this before. I had a client whose son asked me to recreate a famous LA burger at home, an umami burger.
I remember that. Yeah, I'm so glad that wasn't my assignment because that's just not a place that I am that interested in. I think coming from a small town, there were a couple of places that we could go out and get burgers. You know, my dad used to make burgers, but living in a city like Los Angeles, I mean, I can walk to 3 great burger places from my house. So
Yeah.
making them at home to me is like, but there's so many other ways to do it. And I think you're right. It's such a fun party food.
Yeah. So, okay, I think we just start with like what kind of meat are you picking up? Because I think there's sometimes confusion about 80-20 or 90-10 ground beef. And I personally tend to pick 80-20 when I'm making burgers.
Yeah, I completely agree. I did some research and 80-20, more fat in your burger, especially a beef burger, is really important because otherwise it will dry out. And what you're really relying on is the flavor of the meat. I consulted the Food Lab cookbook by Kenji Lopez Alt because, he's such a food scientist in the kitchen. And so one of the things that I really wanted to understand is why do people want that? And he had these great rules. And one of them was grind your meat yourself, which I am definitely not going to do. But I think if you go to your butcher and you say, I want a really coarse ground, high fat beef for my burger, your butcher can do that easily for you.
Yeah. And I think even at your grocery store butcher counter, you can either get those prepackaged squares of ground beef, or they often just have it freshly ground. Like you don't have to ask them to go do something. And even that option that's in the deli case at the butcher counter, I think makes a looser, lighter burger. Although I have to start us off by saying when I make a burger at home, I'm making a smash burger.
Sonia, I love a smash burger, but I've never made it at home. So I want to know exactly what you're doing.
Yeah. So again, Kenji Lopez Alt has a great recipe. I feel like he's kind of a master at making burgers at home. And Serious Eats has this recipe. We'll link it in the show notes. But essentially, a smash burger is a very thin burger that is cooked quite quickly because you're smashing it into your flat top or your pan. At home, you're going to use a pan. In a restaurant, you would have a flat top. And it develops a signature kind of crackly crust. It has that Maillard effect, which browns the meat, which creates all this extra flavor, which is why I like a smash burger. I also just think that making burgers at home, sometimes they get dried out. Sometimes I don't want an undercooked burger. So this to me solves all those problems because it's cooking quickly, because it's thin, it's not going to dry out.
Are you cooking your smash burger in a cast iron skillet? Are you using something that gets really, really hot?
Yeah. So I mostly do it in a cast iron skillet when I'm doing it. But in fact, in this recipe, he says just use a stainless steel skillet. Just any skillet that you can get to a high heat will work for this. So you want to get that pan scorching hot. And then what you do is you're going to roll your beef and you're not even adding anything to this mixture. So this is straight, good quality, freshly ground beef. You roll it into a ball. Then you're putting it in that super hot pan. And then you're using a spatula, like a flat spatula, to smash it in to the pan. And usually it's like one spatula and another spatula, something to really weigh down the spatula that's touching the meat. And it really should only take about a minute to get that crust. Then you lift up your spatula and then you season it. And that's sort of an interesting tip too. So you're not seasoning it before you form the balls of beef. You're just seasoning it once it's already smashed. And then after it has a minute to sort of cook longer, then you flip it and you get the other side brown, but you're no longer smashing it. It's one time only for a smash. So then you flip it. If you want cheese or vegan cheese, if you don't eat dairy, you can then put it on top of your burger once you flip it, and then it can sort of melt over the burger. And you have this crackly, lacy edged burger at home, which I think is so satisfying.
It's so satisfying. And that's also why I don't make them at home because I get them at the end of my street. But there are so many other burgers that you can make. I want to tell you about this bacon and kimchi burger that I came across that I'm super interested in trying. It really caught my eye. This recipe was really interesting because everything that you make everything on the grill, including the bacon. And
Oh,
so the recipe is for four burgers, and you take four strips of bacon and you cook them on the grill, which I've never done before. So I'm kind of curious. I think you could also put your cast iron skillet on a grill. And then you make a spicy sauce with mayo, ketchup, and sambal oleg, which is that Asian chili sauce that has a little bit of garlic in it too. Then you portion out your meat. And the idea is that you're making a double burger. So it's two patties per person, and you cook each of them and you glaze them with a little bit of this sweet, spicy mayonnaise mix. And then you stack two patties on top of each other. You add the bacon, you add cheese if you want to add cheese, and then you toast your buns and you put a little bit more of that spicy mayonnaise on the bottom of your bun and put the stack on. And then you put kimchi on the top of the burger.
I was gonna say, but where does the kimchi come in?
Yes. Yeah. And when you're putting the kimchi on top of the burger after it's been cooked, the kimchi is cold. You get those different textures, those different temperatures. Would you ever make something like that?
I want to put the kimchi in the burger mix. When you're talking, I'm like, wouldn't it be interesting to chop up some kimchi and add it to the ground meat mixture with a little scallion? And then my mind goes to other kinds of meat like chicken or turkey that could be combined with kimchi because sometimes you want to add a little moisture to those mixes. But I think the flavors you're talking about sound so delicious. I also think you're talking about just how can you make a burger night a little more exciting at home. If you have a great burger joint that you go to, this isn't going to be on their menu necessarily. And so, what can you do at home that might feel different? Also, when you're talking about the glazing, it reminded me of brushing your patties with mustard. Do you ever do that?
I have never done that before, but my friends make burgers that way. And I've had many burgers at their house. My friend Maylin, her husband is a really great grill cook, and he always puts a layer of Dijon mustard on his burgers when they're on the grill. It really adds a lot of flavor.
It's such a technique from In and Out. I think even in their classic burgers, they have a mustard layer. It might be something you ask for. It might be in their classic burgers, but I always think about In and Out burgers when I think about that. But you could even use yellow mustard. It doesn't have to be Dijon. And you brush it onto the raw patty and then you put it onto your pan or your grill, whatever you're using to cook it.
Yeah, I just think it adds that tanginess and an extra dimension of flavor, especially if you're not adding a lot of other things to your patty.
Yeah. And I think the other thing about burger nights at home is while beef burgers are delicious, they're the classic, nothing wrong with them. Not everyone eats beef, not everyone wants that. So if I'm hosting, if I'm making burgers at a barbecue or a picnic, I like to have other options besides just beef. I have to say my go-to is usually a turkey burger, and I think that's because of being a personal chef and caterer. I feel like people are always asking for turkey burgers.
I definitely think people are always asking for turkey burgers. And I have to say, this is a real deficit in being a personal chef and in also just being a home cook. I don't have a good turkey burger recipe. And this is honestly the number one reason I wanted to have this conversation with you, because I feel like you're someone who has a good turkey burger recipe. So please tell me that's true.
Yeah, I have more of a turkey burger technique, although I did find a recipe that's really similar to the ratios that I use because I usually eyeball it. But I think the thing is that if you have the basic understanding of how to make a turkey burger flavorful enough and not dry, then you can sort of add your other components that you want. So the base for me is always a darker ground turkey, if possible, is going to be better here than the lean ground turkey. And
Yes.
usually there are those options. A fresh ground turkey is ideal, but I've definitely made this with the prepackaged kind. Breadcrumbs, I tend to use panko because I find them to be a little lighter, but any breadcrumb will work. Even matzo meal will work for those who might have that in their cupboard. And then a quarter cup, or to me, is usually like half a small white onion or yellow onion. The onion not only adds flavor, it's going to add moisture, which your turkey really needs. And
Yeah.
then garlic powder or minced garlic. I like to just grate a clove of garlic and then for flavor, an egg. And this is different. When you're making a regular burger, you don't need to add egg. When you're making a turkey burger, because again, it's drier, it's going to add both moisture and help it to keep its shape. So I always add an egg, then salt, pepper. Now, in terms of if you want to zhuzh it up, if you want to make this something special, there's all kinds of add-ins that I like. One, I might do a small, finely diced bell pepper with my
Oh,
onion.
interesting. Okay. I never thought of adding a bell pepper. I would think of adding something like zucchini. Do you ever do that?
I have done zucchini, but more
Yeah.
as patties, more like as little slider sized, what
Right.
we in our house called kotlety, which are like Soviet style meat patty. But yes, you could do grated or diced zucchini. But if you're going to do pepper, it should be really finely diced because you don't want chunks of ingredients that are too wet. You really want it to kind of blend in. I love doing a little bit of chili pepper and adobo if you want a
Make it
smoky.
smoky. Yeah.
Exactly. I often add some fresh herbs like freshly chopped parsley, but I used to make these and I would make them ahead of time for clients. I would make kind of exactly what I just described to you, the basic burger without all the add-ins. And I had a client who I would make lunches for in advance, and the turkey burger was her favorite thing that I would make. And I think if you just add enough of these additional moisture elements, it doesn't dry out. And then it's all about the condiments you enjoy.
I mean, I think of this as like a meal prep idea, but I think making something like that for my son and maybe putting it into his lunch or having that for myself on a day when I know I'm going to be really busy. I just love that idea that you're adding all of this flavor, you're getting this great protein, but it's not boring. I think reheating a beef burger, I don't know, that just sounds less appetizing to me than reheating something that's essentially a meatball.
That's such a good point. You're really right. I don't typically reheat a beef burger,
Yeah.
certainly not a smash burger, but a turkey burger, I make them in advance all the time. I also like to make them in that small slider size, and that makes for a really satisfying lunch.
Yeah, that's a really great idea. I'm for sure going to try that. I do feel like I can bring something great to the table, though, with a salmon burger that I used to cook a lot for clients. And I very much remember the recipe. This was like definitely there was the internet, but there weren't all the iPhones and all the apps and all the things. And one of my clients would save recipes. She would photocopy them and they would be in a book. And there was this salmon burger recipe from Mark Bittman. It uses fresh salmon, which I kind of really love. You cut it up into smaller pieces and you pulse some of it in the food processor with a little bit of shallot and a little bit of mustard. And then you add a little bit more and you pulse it again with some breadcrumbs. You form these loose patties. But the best tip of this recipe is actually that you cook your salmon burgers in butter. Oh, the one of the pieces that I forgot to add to say is in the mix too are capers. So it's mustard, capers, and then all this great salmon and some shallots. And it has a lot of great flavor, but the flavor really highlights the salmon flavor. It doesn't mask it.
I'm pretty sure I made this recipe for my clients when I was a personal chef. I feel like I remember it coming out. And my clients, just like yours, would literally photocopy or even cut out articles for me to
Yes,
make. Like, Oh, Sonia, can you try this recipe? There's something I love about that because I still have them. I still have a book with those cutout recipes. And I don't know, it's just not the same on your phone, right? But
It's
that
not.
but that fresh salmon really is delicious and it makes for such a tender, flavorful, fresh tasting burger. Although I think I mentioned this once before, I have a very similar recipe I do with leftover salmon, which is like a salmon patty, I would call it, less a
Oh,
salmon
yeah.
burger, which is still capers and mustard and lemon. And it's kind of the same flavor profile. So I feel like salmon burgers are so versatile in that you could use fresh or previously frozen and defrosted salmon, or you could even just use leftover cooked salmon.
Yeah, my hot tip as a personal chef was that I would also make a homemade tartar sauce to go with it. What's so great about burgers is that they're so customizable. So I would often make salmon burgers and the kids would also eat them. This would like help introduce fish and salmon to kids. But the kids wouldn't want tartar sauce, but the parents would really love it. And it was basically just a mix of mayonnaise and I would finely dice up a shallot. I would do a lot of salt and pepper and lemon, and then I would usually add like a little bit of sweet pickle relish, which would kind of balance it out. And that sauce on that salmon burger was really delicious.
I love a homemade tartar sauce. I also love a homemade cocktail sauce. I mean, I also think it's worth making a homemade special sauce. And I'm glad you brought sauces up because it reminds me of this Kenji Lopez alt sauce. I feel like Kenji is the star of our episode today, but he really is such an expert on home burgers. And there's a million recipes out there for that burger sauce, which is some combination of mayonnaise and mustard and ketchup. And I like that Kenji includes all three mayonnaise, mustard, and ketchup, and yellow mustard, which I think is important in a burger sauce. I think it adds a special flavor that Dijon doesn't. But like your tartar sauce, I think these special sauces benefit from some kind of relish or chopped up pickle. You just want that bright acidity in there.
Yeah, I completely agree. And Sonia, I also wanted to talk about vegan burgers because I will say that was something I used to make a lot for clients. When we started talking about this topic, I realized I don't cook that at all for my family. So I did make a vegan burger this week that I really loved. It was really easy because it was a mix of brown rice, a can of lentils, and a cup of toasted walnuts. You kind of pulse that together in your food processor with some onions that you've sauteed and a little bit of garlic. What's really interesting about this recipe is that it's also for a double burger. So the recipe is for 4 people, but you take that mixture and you divide it into 8 patties. And so you're getting more of what you were talking about with them. I think you call it the Maillard reaction, where it makes it brown, like it browns your meat, and that's where all the flavor comes from. Obviously, this is a vegan burger, so you're not browning the meat, but it's having more of that browned surface area on 2 patties instead of one really creates a lot of great flavor. I did put American cheese on my version of this burger, so it definitely was not vegan, but it was still vegetarian. The feedback from my niece was actually that it tasted kind of like rice and beans. I mean, that makes sense. It's basically rice and beans.
And you said it was lentils, right?
Yeah, a can of
Yes.
lentils, which was easy.
That's so interesting. So I remember the day I had a homemade veggie burger for the first time. I was visiting my friend John, who had a friend James over, and James had one recipe he loved to make for parties, which was his lentil burgers. And I looked up the recipe because he shared it with me, and it sounds so similar to what you said. It has cans of lentils,
Uh-huh.
rice. He also adds pitted prunes, which I was
No.
like, wow. And I think that was part of what bound it together and added sort of a balancing sweetness, but not in an overpowering way. And then he had onion, he had cinnamon, cumin, sumac. This was James
Wow.
is Australian, and this was in the year 2009. So this was
A
before
man ahead of his time.
this was way before any of these trends. And I remember being like, this is the best veggie burger I've ever had because at that time there was no Impossible Burger. It was like Boca Burgers or
Yeah.
those kinds of
Those
weird kind of
frozen sad
grocery.
patties.
Yes,
Totally.
exactly. So this was a revelation to me. And while I do think there's a beans and rice element to these burgers, I think if you add these kinds of interesting spices and maybe even a portobello mushroom chopped up or prunes, obviously, in this case, it can really feel satisfying. And if you don't try to sell it as a meat replacement,
Yes.
I think if you're just saying this is a lentil burger, this is a veggie burger.
No, I agree. I do think it is how you sell it. But what I also liked about this burger is it actually did resemble a beef patty because the brown rice and the lentils and the walnuts, they're brown in color. It looked and it was sort of nubbly like a beef burger is. And the idea that you would add prunes to this is also really interesting to me because it would add a little bit of sweetness and also a color to it too, which would be nice, you know?
Yeah, that's a really good point. I kind of want to try this. I want to maybe try to merge the two and see what comes up. But I kind of am a fan of a sort of earthy, crunchy burger every now and then. I also like mushroom burgers, and often I would marinate portobello caps, and that could be sort of a topping for a burger or replace a burger itself. And I think it can be delicious, especially if you put a nice piece of Gruyere cheese or some kind of fun cheese that goes with the mushroom that can liven it up. But I found this really great Ali Slagle recipe for the New York Times for, again, a smash burger. But in this case, it's a mushroom smash burger.
Oh, wow.
And it is just whole portobello mushrooms. It's not like you have to make any mixture. So I love the ease of this. You basically make an oil mixture with onion powder, salt, and pepper, and then you brush that oil over your mushroom caps. So I like that's very minimally seasoned. It doesn't require a lot of work. And then she tells you to heat a large cast iron skillet over medium high heat. And she also gives you this tip to cover your skillet with foil. So you get that great heat of a cast iron, but the mushroom won't stick as much to it. And I think mushrooms can get really sticky even in the best
Yeah.
cast iron skillet. So I thought that was an interesting tip. And then you're cooking and flipping the mushroom every 2 minutes. And they sort of start to flatten out after about 4 minutes. And you can occasionally sort of push them down to get them browner. And then you keep doing that even more for like 8 to 10 minutes. So it's flipping every couple of minutes, pressing them down, getting them really browned and really flattened. And then you can put cheese on top. She suggests cheddar. I think you could do any kind of great melty cheese. And that's your burger replacement. And I think that could be really great too, especially if you're having a big party where you don't want a lot of complicated ingredients. You want your burger patties that are super simple, and then having some vegan options for people who aren't going to eat the meat. To me, it feels like a good sort of easy swap for a burger.
I have to be honest, when you started with a portobello cap and all this situation, I was like, no way. There's not 1 ounce of me that would be interested in that because I've eaten so many bad versions of a portobello burger before. But this idea that you're flipping it every 2 minutes and smashing it down to me eliminates so much of what I don't like about a portobello burger, which is that it's watery. And the idea that you're getting rid of that in the pan and that all that flavor is being concentrated in that crispy smash burger is really interesting because the truth is a well-cooked mushroom really has that umami meaty flavor that you're looking for. And I do eat meat, but I also love vegetables, and there are just times when I want something that's a little bit lighter. I definitely am going to try this recipe.
Well, can I read what she says? Because I think it's
Yes.
exactly to your point. And this is also, by the way, a 5-star recipe with over 600 reviews. I always feel like if it's really truly 5-star, it's working on the New
Yeah.
York Times. So
Yeah.
she says, cooking the mushrooms this way forces the water out of their spongy bodies, turning them into something meaty and satisfying. Because they're so thin, you'll want to stack 2 mushrooms per bun. You can use other large mushrooms like oyster or maitake.
I think it sounds genius. There was another veggie burger that I tried that I also really liked. It was a patty that was held together by a steamed sweet potato, but you took grated zucchini and a portobello mushroom and you pulsed them together in your food processor. And then you cooked that a little bit with some onions and garlic. It was fussy. There are a lot of different steps, but this was also a great veggie burger if you have time. But I want to try this portobello one.
Yeah, I think that's the problem with some veggie burgers is there's too many steps. I think we also have to briefly talk about sides because while I think for a burger night, you actually don't need to do much besides the burgers, the buns, the condiments. You can have your whole spread of ingredients out there and then different simple sides. We can get into the simple ones, but there's one that I feel like is just a little bit of work but has big results, which is a Northwest classic. Carrie, have you ever heard of JoJo's?
No, I have not heard of JoJo's. What is a JoJo?
JoJo is like the national dish of Portland, or I mean, I think the entire Northwest. I grew up with it in Seattle too. I'm sure there are versions of this all over the country, but the one here is really particular. It's steak fries that are essentially coated in flour and seasoning, and then they're fried. So they're like lightly dusted, lightly battered. So it gives the crispiest, most delicate outside texture to the potato. The recipe that I like is an oven baked version. So it's so simple. You don't have to deep fry anything. You don't have to do all these crazy steps, but you're cutting your potatoes, your russet potatoes has to be russet
Right.
because they're like starchier and lighter, and you're dusting them in flour and you're just baking them and flipping them on each side. I'll link a recipe, but I really think JoJo's, if you don't want to make homemade fries and you want to make just some kind of potato side, it's a fun way to do something homemade that doesn't take a lot of effort and is absolute comfort food.
I really love this idea, but I have to be honest, my mind always goes to just cooking the burger. And I forget that you should really prep all your sides and ingredients and sauces first, because this is what I really struggle with. I was sort of looking on the internet for different advice. And I found this really great article that it was an interview with Nancy Silverton, who's a chef in Los Angeles. She has many restaurants, but she grew up in Los Angeles. And she talks about how when she entertains, she loves to do a burger bar because she's quoted by saying, everyone gets to personalize their burger, everyone gets to participate. And these are ideas that are really important to you and I as people who like to serve food to other people. But also, this was really important when I was a personal chef. And I know when you are a personal chef, is that when you're making a party, you want to make sure everyone can participate. So, whether you're a meat eater or a vegetarian or a vegan or a kid or an adult that just likes things to be plain, laying out trays of different sauces, different cheeses, some fresh elements like onion. What do you usually do? I usually do onion, tomato, some lettuce. I like a butter lettuce because it sort of lays nicer on a bun.
Okay, you're right that it lays nicely on a bun. You know, I go iceberg. I love iceberg on a burger. I think that flavor is just really special. Although for a turkey burger or salmon burger, I might do even little gem or romaine. I think a crisp, firm lettuce for me is
Yeah,
my go-to. I think red onion, it has to be red onion for
it has to
me.
be red onion. Agreed. And sliced very,
Sliced
very
very thin.
thin.
Yes,
Yes.
absolute.
Yes.
Tomato. I like to have tomato around. I think also having sliced pickles. I'm a pickle person. Not everyone is, but this is why a burger bar is so great. You don't want pickles, don't have pickles. If I'm feeling really fancy, maybe I have avocado.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that she's quoted in this article is saying is that one of the extra elements, because she's very specific. She's like, ketchup should be Heinz,
Yeah.
mayonnaise should be Best Foods mayonnaise. She's
Yeah.
very specific about these very American flavors, but she's quoted as saying that she would bring in pickles from New York, from this place that I didn't know, from Gus's Pickles in New York. But I will say, I do go get fancy pickles. There's a place in my neighborhood called Kaylin and Kaylin, and they have these incredible honey mustard pickles. And I also like their sweet hots. So if I'm going to do a burger night, I'm definitely putting those pickles on my burger bar.
I love that tip. And those pickles sound amazing. And it reminds me, another thing I like to have out are pickled jalapenos.
Oh,
And
yeah.
actually, Trader Joe's has a really good sweet and spicy pickled jalapeno in the summer that is really inexpensive and jarred. It's great. I think this is the thing. It's like you get to choose where you want to put a little more attention, where you want to get something a little nicer, like a bun. Like if I can find them, which is very hard on the West Coast, I love a Martin's potato roll. That's what Shake Shack uses. They're kind of sweet and so soft, but still sturdy. I love a brioche bun if it's a good one. I think, sometimes if I'm hosting, I want to invest in a better bun if I'm doing some kind of spread of burgers.
Yeah, I agree with you, but I very strongly disagree with you on brioche. I think brioche is too rich. And so I love a potato roll, but you can always use the King's Sweet Hawaiian, which I think you can really get at any grocery store. And in fact, that's the burger bun that the place that we go to every week, they serve it on King's Hawaiian as well.
Oh, they have King's Hawaiian hamburger buns, not the little rolls.
No, it's just like a little roll and I think they cut out a little bit of the inside so it's not so thick.
But then they're making sliders.
The place that we go to has sliders.
Okay, I
Sorry.
get it. I think King's, though, does make a hamburger bun as well as a little roll. And I think that then it's just up to you. If you don't like brioche and it's too rich, skip the brioche. I also think there's no shame in just a standard sesame seed burger bun. And this is what the fun of burger night is all about. You could put out two different kinds of buns and find out what your friends really enjoy.
I think idea of it being inclusive, I think that's what makes a burger night so fun.
Yeah, and you can put out potato chips. You don't have to make JoJo's. You could get store-bought coleslaw, or it's a great opportunity to have your friends bring the sides. You handle the burgers and all the fixins, and they can bring everything else.
Yeah, I really love that. Now I'm really excited to make all these different kinds of burgers.
Me too. Until next time.
Bye. Thanks for being our food friend.
If you enjoyed our podcast, please subscribe, leave us a review, and share this episode with friends. We love hearing from you, so follow us on Instagram or drop us a line at foodfriendspodcast.com.
Yes, we'd love to hear from you and your food friends. Happy cooking and eating.